Hello everyone, my name is Lily. Welcome to Dear Jess. Dear Jess is a grief support channel for those who are grieving the death of their best friend. My very best friend since childhood died almost 3 years ago. Her name was Jess. Today's topic is going to be a very, very important topic to me. It's honestly the entire reason that I started this channel to begin with. The topic is validating grief. Most specifically, so any grief, any type of grief is very important to be validated. If you look up the cure for grief, if there is such a thing, you will find kind of two separate things out there, one of which says the cure for grief is validation. The other one says that the cure for grief is movement. I'll make a whole video on what that means in terms of the cure for grief is movement another time. However, again, this really is going to be about the validation, because honestly, you can't get to the movement until you get to the validation. So I'd really honestly like to start out with a quote that I found to be very helpful. That quote is by a psychotherapist who specializes in end-of-life care and bereavement. Her name is Dr. Lonnie Leary. And the quote says this: "The great healer of our grief is validation, not time. All grief needs to be blessed. In order to be blessed, it must be heard. Someone must be present, someone who is willing to hold it by listening without judgment or comparison." So again, my best friend died almost 3 years ago. Grief validation became huge for me in my healing process. It's my opinion, I believe it's fact, that at least in the society where I live, the death of your close friend is not something that is validated in our society. The pain that you feel is not validated in our society. What do I mean by that? For me, I love my best friend. I loved her just as much as I love my sisters. She was a part of my life integrally. We met in the 2nd grade. And when she died, luckily I was lucky enough to have her family let me sit up front with them and very much include me in the funeral, at least, and in the caretaking of her at the end. However, after the funeral, I went from being a part of her regular life. I went from knowing all about her son and her relationship with her husband, probably knowing too much, as friends can share, to really nothing. And when you're grieving and when you're in pain, and the person that you want to talk to the most, we used to talk 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, text, we used to text, and those were the hardest times for me. And it was such a natural instinct for me, when she couldn't sleep or I couldn't sleep, to text each other, and she wasn't there. And when a best friend dies, if you're you help each other through life, and suddenly that person is gone, and this is a huge pain, a huge thing that you need to talk to your friend about, and they're not there, obviously, that's something that affects you. When a sister dies, a brother, a parent, obviously, of course, when a child dies, when a family member dies or a spouse dies, society, rightly so, at least acknowledges that someone lost someone that they love. And unfortunately, that's just not the case with a friend in general. I remember that I had a job interview 2 days after she was put on hospice, and they said, "When can you start?" And I said, "Well, my best friend was just put on hospice, and it's kind of a hard time. I'm not really sure." And they, perhaps I shouldn't have gone on the job interview, but, and they said, okay, can you start on Monday? I mean, it wasn't even like, oh, okay, well, this is the right time, or it was just, okay, can you start on Monday? How about Monday then? And unfortunately, that's not cruel. That's just how it is. You're so intimately involved in your friend's life. And then there's a funeral and everyone's giving, family gets sympathy cards, family gets sympathy as they should, as, her husband and her son and her parents and her brother needed support and grief. But suddenly as the friend, it's like you're just gone. You're alone. You can say, can you talk to other friends who are grieving? And yes, of course, in my case, everyone's grief is going to be different, of course, but in my case, we were friends since we were little, and I had friends. I was out of state for many years, and she had friends that she made as an adult. And when I moved back to where we grew up, where she was, we still lived an hour away, and so she had a group of friends close to where she lived, and they were grieving, of course. However, if I were to see them, they would send me the, how are you doing? Everything okay? And I mean, shitty, what are you going to say? Of course, they're just being kind, but they grieved with each other, but I had a different relationship with her, and I remember just having this immense need. I had this immense need after she died. I still do, but especially when you are grieving, when you are mourning, you want to talk. I did. I wanted to talk about my friend. I wanted to share her life. I wanted her to not be forgotten. I wanted to share all these memories. There were so many memories that I had that was just the two of us that I suddenly felt like were going to be erased, because if I was the only one that remembered them, what made them real? Like if it was just me and her, we had just so many close moments, funny moments, sad moments that I wanted to suddenly share. I also had painful memories, and some of them I didn't think were appropriate to share with everyone. Certainly some of them were so painful that I didn't think it was a respect of her privacy to share them, and I just kept them inside. But again, I just wanted to talk about her and not let her be forgotten, because she was so beautiful of a person, and I needed to talk about it. And so after a while, I have sisters, I have a husband. They weren't grieving like I was grieving. They were sad for me. My husband knew her well, obviously, and he was sad, but he wasn't grieving in the same way, I guess. And so at some point, I felt that I was a burden on my family. I was a burden on my friends. And though no one said that, I knew, I don't want to be the Debbie Downer in the room. I don't want to, people are uncomfortable. And again, no one ever said that to me, but it's how you feel after a while. And people clearly needed me to move on. And so I thought, well, I'll join a support group. And that way, some of these things that I need to share with people, if they're strangers, I can share them. And so I did. So I joined a support group, and what I found, everybody in the support group was lovely, but what I felt, I thought that it would be this group of people all sharing their memories, all sharing their pain, and that is what a support group is. But when you're the friend, and I'm in a support group and I'm sitting next to someone who lost their spouse or their sister or their brother, I know that my pain was real pain, and I know that I needed so much to talk, and I was hurting, and honestly I felt so isolated, so alone. I just was so alone. But when I was sitting next to these people who lost what society views as a valid loss, I felt the need to dampen my pain because, and again, no one said you shouldn't be here, but sometimes, I mean, that's how I felt, whether they said it or not. I think if I lost my husband, if I lost my child, if I lost a family member and I don't know the nature of a relationship of someone who lost their friend, I might feel, what the hell are you doing here? And I felt just everywhere I went, I felt this need to say, hey, I loved her and she's gone. So what happened? Eventually I thought, forget it. Nobody wants to hear it. When I would be around her friends, her other friends, I think they were afraid to talk about their pain next to me because they would say, oh, it's probably worse for you. And honestly, I wanted to hear their pain. I wanted to hear people who loved her just talk about her. Her husband was grieving in his own way. And I didn't know I was going to feel just so isolated and so angry and just so many emotions that grief can bring. So at the end of my support group, we were invited to go see a speaker who helps people through grief. He was a grief counselor, and his name is Dr. Alan Wolfelt. And I honestly didn't want to go at this point. It was about a year after she died, and I said, forget it. I'm just, nobody wants to hear it. I need to move on. That's what everybody says. Move on, move on. Honestly, because people around you are uncomfortable. And so I was feeling like I was getting good at just pushing it down, being angry, moving on. How I felt people wanted me to do. And so I went to this talk thinking, I don't even need to go to this talk. I'm just ignoring it. I'm not crying all the time. But I'll go to the talk just because it was the end of the grief support and I felt that I needed to say my goodbyes. And so I went to this talk feeling better when I got there. Like, I got this. I'm over it. That's what they say, right? And in that talk, Dr. Wolfelt talked about the difference between grief and mourning. So what he talks about is that grief is something that's on the inside. It's what you feel. Mourning is what you do to move through it. Mourning is external. And so his exact quote says this: there is an important difference, you see. Grief is what you think and feel on the inside after someone you love dies. Mourning is the outward expression of those thoughts and feelings. To mourn is to be an active participant in our grief journeys. We all grieve when someone we love dies, but if we are to heal, we must also mourn. So I remember when I left there just feeling so mad in the parking lot because suddenly I realized that, he talked about mourning is being with other people who loved your loved one, being with other people who love them like you love them, and hearing memories, good and bad, and not forgetting. You don't want to forget the person. He talks about why funerals are important, and it's a disservice to all those who love the people to have a party and move on. And so I realized I don't have anyone to mourn with. I tried this grief support group and it failed because I felt like I couldn't be real and I couldn't be honest because I was thinking about how everybody else felt and how I shouldn't felt and how I shouldn't be there. And I thought, I don't have anyone. I'm mad. I'm angry. How the hell am I supposed to move through this and keep living? So that night I was just so fired up thinking there must be somebody out there who feels like this. Am I crazy? I really felt like I was crazy. And at this point I needed to move on. Everybody says move on. So I went home that night and I Googled and I Googled and I Googled and I Googled and I was just looking for somebody who lost a friend and felt like me. I started looking for a support group. I thought there must be a support group of friends, good friends, not just a friend. That's part of the problem with validating this, right? The word friend can mean somebody you met last week, and it could be all your coworkers, but again, I loved her. She was my partner in life. I needed a better word, so I didn't feel that whenever I said I lost my friend died, I'm sorry, I'm grieving. Whenever I said this is what happened, sometimes people would say, yeah, hey, I lost a friend once too. Yeah, they would just talk about it like my dog died. So that night I looked and I looked and I looked, and I really thought I would find something. And all I found is video after video that said my best friend died, and it would be their dog or their cat. And, you know, I understand that losing your pet is sad, but it's not a human. And I looked and looked and looked. And finally I found one article, and it was titled, I'll put it in the description below, but it was titled When Your Best Friend Dies. And it just validated everything for me. It validated everything, all that I was feeling, all the truth and the realness. And there's more now. I've looked at this now, you know, 3 years later, but at this time, that was all I found. And suddenly I felt not crazy. And suddenly I felt like this was real. And so why is all this important? What that meant was that I could be in my pain and not feel like I needed to act differently, not feel bad for being sad and angry and screaming at my car. And so once I realized that it was okay, once I realized that I loved her and that screw everybody who doesn't understand, once I realized that, I started sharing again. I started sharing with, you know, who would listen. And eventually there were people that would sit and would hold it. And, you know, maybe one person I would share with for half an hour, another person I would share with this day. But eventually I found people who would listen and just be there and love. And I think it would have been easier had I been able to talk to somebody like me. And so it's taken me a long time to get there, but that's why I'm doing this. There are support groups for siblings and parents and, you know, family, as of course there should be. But I couldn't find anything out there to help me and to share my pain and my memories of my friend and my everything that I needed to share and learn from others without feeling that I needed to dampen my pain. And so that's what this is. So I'm going to share my experiences with you. And I haven't started it yet. This is my first video. But my plan is to have, I don't know yet, you guys tell me, either a Facebook group or a website. This is all new for me. I'm not a technology person. But I want a place for you to go. I want a place for you to talk freely about your friend, about your loved one, about your pain, about your memories, with people who know a similar pain, with people who understand at least somewhat. Though I would wish for my friend back in a heartbeat if I could. This has changed my life. Of course, in some terrible, sad ways, but also, you know, I think of it as this last gift from my friend about how this grief and this process has changed my life in a beautiful way. Again, it's terrible that my friend has died, but you can live again. And I want you to remember until next time that your pain is real. You are not alone. Your friend mattered and still does.